You're not even a real mother. You just picked them up off the street. That's what my sister-in-law screamed as she swung her hand and slapped me right in the face, right in front of the panicked, tear-filled eyes of my children. She was arrogant, but she had absolutely no idea that Slap had just single-handedly smashed the invisible ATM that had been paying her mortgage for the past 3 years. The Navy officer instinct in me activated. I didn't panic. I wiped the corner of my mouth, smiled coldly, and stared right into the eyes of the person who had just struck me. "You have exactly 10 seconds," I whispered, a ruthless smile blooming. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really want to know the ending of this story, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. The sharp burning sensation on my left cheek yanked me backward through 3 decades of sharp, deliberate humiliation in under a heartbeat. I grew up crushed under the suffocating shadow of my older brother Ethan, the undisputed golden boy of the Ortiz family. The contrast between us was not subtle. It was systemic. It was architectural. It was built into every holiday, every birthday, every dinner table conversation my parents ever conducted, like a board meeting where I was never given a seat. When Ethan turned 18, my father threw a backyard party with a live jazz quartet, imported champagne, a 3-tier fondant cake, and a toast that lasted 4 minutes. He called Ethan the future of the family name, the crown jewel, the one who would carry the Ortiz legacy into the boardrooms of Manhattan. Then he handed him the keys to a brand new midnight blue BMW with a white ribbon on the hood and a blank check for his Ivy League tuition to study high finance. Every relative in attendance clapped. My mother cried happy tears into a silk handkerchief. 2 years later, on my 18th birthday, I received a drugstore greeting card with a $50 bill tucked inside and a tight-lipped reminder from my mother that dinner was at 6, that I should wear something presentable, and that I should not make a fuss because it was just a Tuesday. No cake, no toast, no keys to anything. I sat at that dining table watching my parents fawn over Ethan's latest internship photographs pinned to the refrigerator, and I realized with the calm, absolute clarity of a person reading their own medical chart that I would never be enough for these people, not because I had failed, because I was never entered into the competition. I walked into a sterile military recruiter's office the following Monday morning. The fluorescent light hummed above a metal desk covered in pamphlets. A sergeant with calloused hands and a crew cut looked me dead in the eyes and asked me if I understood what I was signing up for. I told him I did. I signed my name, traded the country club memberships and tea parties for heavy combat boots. 4:30 morning conditioning runs through freezing rain and highly classified tactical cyber warfare training, where the recycled air tasted like cold steel and burnt circuit boards. My parents treated my enlistment as a personal betrayal. My mother told her book club I was going through a rebellious phase and would come to my senses eventually. My father stopped mentioning me at family dinners entirely, as if the chair I sat in was simply empty. Meanwhile, I was building a spine out of iron discipline in places they could not point to on a map, and they were too busy polishing Ethan's collapsing house of cards to notice or care. Over the years, I endured my sister-in-law Patricia's relentless, weaponized snobbery with the calculated patience of a sniper locked in a blind counting heartbeats. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner with surgical precision. The mahogany table was set with my mother's imported china. Candles flickered in silver holders. Patricia sat directly across from me, clinking her crystal champagne flute against my brother's glass, then turned her head and cast a long, deliberate, pitying glance at my tailored but unbranded navy blazer. She sighed loudly enough for the entire table to hear, dabbed the corner of her glossed lips with a linen napkin, and leaned toward my mother with a manufactured, sympathetic whisper. "It must be so devastating," she said, swirling the champagne in her glass, "being stuck on a little government paycheck like that. Bless her heart. She said it the way you talk about a neighbor's sickly dog you wish someone would just put down." I executed 4 deliberate rounds of tactical breathing under the table, my boots flat against the hardwood, my posture rigid, my expression revealing absolutely nothing. I catalogued her words. Not as a wound, as intelligence. As evidence, I would file away in a locked drawer inside my skull and retrieve at the exact moment it would cause her the most devastation. The real collapse happened exactly 3 years before that barbecue slap. A Tuesday night. Heavy rain hammered my living room windows so hard the glass rattled in the wooden frames. The doorbell rang at 11:30. I pulled the door open and found the golden boy standing on my porch, completely stripped of every layer of arrogant armor he had ever worn. He was pale, trembling. Sweat soaked clean through his $4,000 tailored Italian suit, darkening the fabric across his chest and under his arms. He had been unceremoniously fired that afternoon and permanently blacklisted from the entire financial sector for severe, undeniable insider trading violations. His pristine, carefully curated Wall Street reputation was reduced to a charred, smoking ruin overnight. The bank was already circling his sprawling mansion, preparing foreclosure documents, picking over his carcass before it was even cold. He stumbled past me into the living room, collapsed onto my sofa, and wept like a terrified child, snot running freely into his open palms, his expensive Italian leather shoes dripping rainwater onto my hardwood floor. He begged me in a voice cracked and stripped raw not to tell our mother. I did not help him out of warm sibling love. I did not do it out of some residual family obligation. I did it strictly exclusively to protect my aging, fragile mother from the fatal cardiac shock of discovering that her golden son, her pride, her life's work, was a disgraced criminal whose face would be splattered across financial news sites by morning. I leveraged my flawless military credit score, my top-tier security clearance status, and the massive covert investment yields I had been methodically accumulating for 2 decades. I quietly assumed the full suffocating burden of his exorbitant mortgage. I became the invisible ATM. The only condition I demanded in return was his absolute permanent silence. I sat in my armchair and watched him wipe his tears, blow his nose into a crumpled tissue, and then I watched his face rearrange itself back into its default mask of arrogance in real time, like watching a reptile shed its vulnerable skin the exact second my wire transfer confirmation pinged his phone. He did not say thank you. He did not ask how I could afford it. He straightened his tie, ran his fingers through his wet hair, and walked out my front door without looking back, as if the last 45 minutes of sobbing on my sofa had never happened. I locked that toxic secret in the darkest vault of my mind and bolted it shut. I had just armed the bomb that would eventually destroy him. I simply did not know the fuse length yet. The cold, piercing blue glow of the Strategic Command Center at U.S. Fleet Cyber Command was more of a home to me than any house my family ever owned. I spent my days surrounded by the low electronic hum of servers processing threat data from 6 continents, carrying the immense weight of global threat matrices on my shoulders, neutralizing international cyber intrusions before most Americans finished their morning coffee. I was not the low-level government grunt Patricia imagined when she practiced her pitying head tilts across the dinner table. I was a senior commanding officer, heavily cleared, operating in the deep end of national defense, where a single wrong decision could cascade into an international incident. My official military salary was substantial on its own, but the aggressive, meticulously calculated stock and real estate investments I had been compounding for over 20 years had quietly made me a millionaire several times over, operating entirely off Patricia's radar. Every time she leaned across the table at a family dinner reeking of her suffocating floral perfume and offered to pay for my coffee with a sympathetic head tilt, the grim irony of it physically tightened my jaw until my teeth ached. My hidden portfolio was the only thing standing between her and a cardboard box behind a strip mall. I came home every night to the one human being on this planet who kept me from turning entirely to stone. My husband David designed our home himself. Every room was his signature: clean lines, natural light pouring through oversized windows, warm cedar wood built into the shelving and the staircase banisters, filling the entire house with a scent that meant safety in a way no security clearance ever could. He would be sitting at his massive oak drafting table in the study when I walked through the door, tracing architectural blueprints with steady, precise hands, a mug of black tea cooling beside his elbow. He never demanded debriefings about my day. He never flinched at my long silences. He would simply stand up from his chair, cross the room, press his warm forehead gently against mine, and hold me there, breathing slowly until my locked shoulders finally dropped. The heavy commander's armor came off in that house. Only in that house. Only with him. The cruelest weapon the Ortiz family wielded against me did not involve money or status. It lived in the dining room at every single holiday gathering, whispered between sips of wine and bites of turkey. For years, I endured Patricia leaning into my mother's ear, her voice pitched at that specific volume, designed to be overheard, whispering the words, barren and failure and what a shame, while glancing in my direction. My mother would sigh heavily, shake her head with theatrical disappointment, and then fix me with those tired, accusatory eyes across the mashed potatoes. The questions came every December without fail, growing more aggressive each year. When was I going to fulfill my duty as a woman? Why I was denying the family an heir? Whether I had considered getting checked out, because surely something was wrong with me. I would grip my water glass under the table until my knuckles turned stark white, absorbing every venomous whisper, every disappointed headshake, every Christmas prayer circle where my mother publicly asked God to bless my empty womb without spilling a single drop and without raising my voice even once. The truth was a grenade I had been holding with the pin pulled for 17 years. I was perfectly healthy. My body was not the one that carried the diagnosis. David was the one who had been diagnosed with severe, irreversible male infertility. I sat beside him in that sterile doctor's office, fluorescent lights buzzing above us, the thin paper on the examination table crinkling under his weight, and I watched his face collapse as the specialist delivered the results in a flat, clinical monotone. His hands went limp in his lap, his jaw locked. He stared at a point on the wall behind the doctor's head and did not blink for what felt like a full minute. I made the most calculated, deliberate, tactical decision of my life in that room. I chose to claim the medical fault as entirely my own. I stepped directly into the firing line and planted my boots to shield his pride, his masculinity, his dignity, from my family's conservative, uneducated, and relentlessly cruel judgment. I absorbed every single barren woman whisper at every holiday dinner for 17 consecutive years, every disappointed sigh, every prayer circle humiliation. I locked this truth so deep inside my core that it became part of my skeleton, a silent, unbreakable vow that bonded David and me in a loyalty my blood relatives could not even begin to comprehend. We adopted Zara when she was 4 years old and Chloe when she was a newborn. The legal paperwork took 11 agonizing months of forms and interviews and home inspections. The love took 11 seconds. I held Chloe for the first time in a cold government office that smelled of floor polish and old paper, and her tiny, impossibly small fist closed around my index finger with a grip that seemed to anchor me to the floor. The war inside my chest, the one that had been raging since I was 18 years old, went quiet for the first time in my adult life. David stood behind me, his hand warm and heavy on my shoulder, tears running silently down both his cheeks, his architect's hands trembling. We built our fortress from that moment brick by brick, on a foundation of absolute truth, sacrifice, and a loyalty fierce enough to set fire to anything that threatened it. My mother's annual 4th of July barbecue landed on a Saturday that year. The house sprawled across 2 acres of manicured suburban lawn, bordered by white picket fencing and American flags snapping on tall poles in the thick summer air. I scanned the property the moment we stepped through the side gate, the tactical sweep happening automatically, before my conscious mind had even finished registering the scene. The catering was excessive. A full roasted pig on a spit, 3 different dessert tables, a bartender mixing drinks behind a rented mahogany bar. The laughter drifting across the lawn was hollow and performed the kind of noise people make when they are more concerned with being seen than being happy. The guest list was bloated with superficial acquaintances, colleagues of my mother's from her charity board, couples from the neighborhood invited purely for show. I identified the exits, the blind spots behind the pool house, and the exact cluster of cushioned lawn chairs near the massive outdoor grill where my brother was holding court, a craft beer sweating in his hand, Patricia draped decoratively on his arm in a brand new designer sundress that cost more than some family's monthly rent. She was laughing loudly, artificially, tossing her highlighted hair over one shoulder, completely intoxicated by her own hollow manufactured importance. I retreated to the shaded stone patio at the far end of the property and instantly found myself flanked by 3 off-duty Navy officers who had accepted my invitation to the event. We formed a loose, comfortable perimeter holding cold, sweating bottles of mineral water, discussing low-level network protocol updates and upcoming deployment rotation schedules in calm, measured tones. Their solid, imposing physical presence served as a vital tactical buffer against my family's invasive probing and the passive-aggressive remarks that drifted across the lawn like secondhand smoke. Surrounded by men and women who had earned my trust through fire and discipline, not through the random accident of shared genetics, I allowed myself to take one full, real breath. The unquestioning respect and quiet camaraderie of my peers washed over me like clean water, a stark, brutal contrast to the disdain radiating from my own blood family 30 yards away. From my vantage point on the patio, I watched my brother standing near the grill holding that craft beer, wearing the tight, panicked smile of a man who knew his entire existence was a meticulously constructed fraud, financed by the sister he openly ignored. He caught my eye once across the crowded lawn, held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away and took a long pull from his bottle. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water and felt cold, clinical disgust coat the back of my throat like bile. My situational awareness spiked violently before my conscious mind registered the cause. I stopped mid-sentence, cutting off a colleague in the middle of a joke about a malfunctioning drone. My eyes locked onto a sudden disturbance near the far, slippery edge of the swimming pool. The ambient, buzzing chatter of the party collapsed into a dull, white noise roar in my ears. I spotted my youngest daughter, Chloe, breaking away from a tight cluster of older kids near the deep end. Her small shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. Her face was buried in both hands. She was running blind, stumbling on the wet concrete, heading straight toward me. I set my glass down on the patio table with a sharp, definitive clink. Every muscle in my body snapped taut. Mother mode deactivated. Combat-ready commander came online. Chloe crashed into my legs with enough force to knock me back a half step. She buried her tear-soaked face deep into the thick fabric of my jeans, her entire body trembling so violently I could feel the vibrations in my kneecaps. I dropped into a defensive crouch, instantly ignoring the shattered remains of her spilled drink, spreading across the concrete, and wrapped my arms into an impenetrable physical cage around her small, heaving frame. Her chest spasmed with gasps, so frantic, so raw they sounded like a child drowning on dry land. I pressed my mouth close to her ear and used the low, perfectly calibrated tone I had spent years training into muscle memory. Breathe. Slow. Count to 4. Report. Tell me what happened. The 3 Navy officers behind me took 2 deliberate steps back without a word, the relaxed posture vanishing from their shoulders as they recognized something they had seen dozens of times in the field, a commanding officer in the immediate process of assessing a casualty. The chaotic, buzzing soundtrack of the barbecue seemed to evaporate entirely. Nothing existed anymore except the bubble of intense, suffocating focus I had just created around my daughter and the ragged, broken sound of her breathing fighting against the sobs locked in her chest. She tilted her face upward. Her eyes were so shattered, so devastated, that the expression behind them did not belong on the face of any 10-year-old child who had ever lived. The tears had carved wet, glistening tracks down both cheeks. Her bottom lip quivered so hard her teeth chattered. She fought to push the words out past the thick knot of sobbing clogging her throat, each syllable coming out cracked and ruined. Lucas. Lucas said, he said Zara and I are just charity throwaways, that we don't share this family's blood, that you only picked us up because you can't have kids, that you're not a normal woman. The words hit me like jagged shrapnel tearing through Kevlar, each one ripped through tissue I had genuinely believed was armored beyond reach. The agonizing realization detonated with the force of an IED in the center of my chest. Patricia and Ethan's manufactured venomous hatred had not stayed between adults. It had not stayed contained at the dinner table. It had crawled down into the next generation, infected a 14-year-old boy's mouth, and used it as a weapon to tear the heart out of my 10-year-old daughter's chest beside a swimming pool at a 4th of July party. A freezing, lethal calm instantly flooded my bloodstream, overriding every trace of maternal grief and replacing it with something far more dangerous. My entire psychological framework shifted from defensive posture to total, uncompromising execution mode in under 2 seconds flat. I rose slowly to my full height, vertebra by vertebra, until I stood at rigid attention, My face hardened into an unrecognizable, emotionless mask of polished stone. I pushed Chloe gently but firmly behind me, guiding her into David's arms as he reached us at a dead sprint, his face white and his eyes already blazing. I did not shout. I did not rush. I did not run. I executed a slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly precise march across the sun-baked patio toward the far edge of the swimming pool, where my 14-year-old nephew Lucas stood smirking alongside his two older brothers, Diego and Mateo. Each heavy step my boots landed on the concrete seemed to drain the air pressure from the entire yard. Conversations died mid-word. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My eyes locked onto the boy like a targeting system acquiring a hostile signature, stripping away the arrogant, inherited smirk his parents had taught him to wear, and replacing it with sudden, paralyzing animal dread before I had even opened my mouth to speak. His older brothers took a quiet step sideways, abandoning him with the instinctive cowardice of their father's bloodline. I stopped inches from my nephew invading his personal space with an overwhelming, suffocating authority that made him flinch backward hard enough to nearly lose his footing on the wet pool deck. I projected my voice low, incredibly steady, and so precisely targeted it sliced clean through the lingering party noise like a blade through paper. "Lucas, look me in the eye. Answer me. Zara and Chloe are my daughters bearing the Patel name. They are a part of this family permanently recognized by law and by love. From this second forward, if I ever hear another insulting word out of your mouth aimed at your sisters, you will regret it with the highest price you can possibly imagine. Do you hear me?" The boy turned ash white. Every drop of blood drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. His lips trembled violently. He nodded once, then again, then frantically unable to produce a single syllable of speech. His eyes glistened with the sudden humiliating sting of tears he was fighting to suppress. Before I could even take a step back, a crystal wine glass exploded against the patio stones directly behind me. The sharp, violent crack of shattering glass cut through the silence like a gunshot. I turned my head. Patricia was charging across the manicured grass barefoot, her designer sandals abandoned somewhere behind her. Her face contorted into a snarl so ugly it obliterated every trace of the high society mask she had spent a decade gluing into place. She stormed into my personal space close enough for me to smell the champagne on her breath and the cloying, heavy sweetness of her expensive perfume. She kicked aside a chunk of broken glass without looking down, completely ignoring the dozens of stunned, frozen guests staring at her from every corner of the yard. She jabbed a manicured, violently trembling finger directly into the center of my chest, her entire body vibrating with a hysteria so complete it had swallowed any remaining instinct for self-preservation. She screamed at the top of her lungs, spittle flying from her contorted lips. "What the hell are you doing to my son? Stay away from him, you bitch!" Her voice was a piercing shriek that cut through the thick summer air and bounced off the back wall of the house. Every single person in attendance was now watching. The stage she had demanded was hers. Before I could shift my weight into even a basic defensive stance, she swung her right arm with the full, reckless torque of her entire body behind the strike. The slap connected with a loud, sickening crack across my jaw, snapping my head to the side hard enough to blur my vision for half a second. The entire backyard froze into a deathly, suffocating silence so total it seemed like the air itself had stopped moving. Someone near the bar lunged for the speaker and killed the music. The only sound remaining in that enormous, crowded yard was the low mechanical hum of the pool filter cycling water in the background. Patricia did not pause. She immediately followed the physical assault with a rapid-fire barrage of pure psychological poison, each word designed to inflict maximum damage in front of the largest possible audience. "Who do you think you are to open your mouth and discipline my son? You're just a pathetic, barren woman who had to pick up some bastard orphans just to cover up your own failure. You're jealous of my family, jealous of my biological children who carry the pure Ortiz blood." From the very edge of my peripheral vision, I saw my husband David lunge forward like a wall of muscle and barely contained violence. His eyes blazed with a singular, consuming intent to physically remove her from my proximity. I raised a single, rigid hand without turning my head. He stopped dead in his tracks, as if he had hit a concrete barrier. My silent command overrode his rage with the absolute finality of a steel cable snapping taut. One of the Navy officers behind me had instinctively reached for his belt before catching himself. Another had his phone already halfway out, ready to dial. I lowered my hand slowly. I reached up and wiped a small drop of blood from the split corner of my lower lip with my thumb. I looked at the red smear on my skin, then tasted the sharp metallic tang of copper on my tongue. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not take a step backward. I looked Patricia dead in her wide, dilated, frantic eyes and let a terrifying, dead-eyed, predatory smile spread slowly, deliberately across my bleeding face. You have exactly 10 seconds to get off this property. Before I call the military police and local law enforcement to drag you away in handcuffs for assaulting an active duty officer. My voice was barely above a whisper. It carried the crushing, immovable weight of an absolute guarantee backed by federal law and 23 years of military authority. Patricia's wild, triumphant expression flickered. The arrogance cracked for exactly 1 second, and behind it I saw something small and terrified peek out before she blinked it away. My brother Ethan scrambled out of the paralyzed crowd, his face completely drained of color, sweat running in visible streams down both temples, his entire body radiating the sour, acrid stench of pure fear. He stepped nervously in front of his wife with both palms raised, positioning himself as a human shield, and launched into the most pathetic, transparently desperate gaslighting performance I had witnessed in my entire career of studying psychological manipulation. Come on, Amber, you're overreacting. Calm down. She's just a mother protecting her kid. You're the one who came over and started this. Don't blow it out of proportion. Let it go. We're family. I looked at my brother. The man whose mortgage I had silently paid for 3 years. The disgraced fraud whose children attended elite private schools on my money. The coward who had sobbed on my sofa and begged for my help, and was now standing in front of the woman who had just physically assaulted me, and called my daughters bastard orphans, asking me to let it go, because we are family. I felt my split lip curl with a disgust so pure, so concentrated, it tasted like battery acid dissolving the last surviving thread of whatever connection I had ever felt toward him. Overreacting, Ethan, fine. Enjoy the last few days of peace you have left. I held his stare long enough to watch the sweat bead and run down the side of his neck into his collar. Then I gave David a sharp single nod. We evacuated the perimeter in a tight, deliberate formation, Zara and Chloe shielded between our bodies, leaving the shattered, whispering ruins of that barbecue behind us, like a structure fire I would never waste a single drop of water trying to extinguish. I never expected the people who shared my blood to be the ones holding the knife to my back. If you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family to protect your peace, hit that like button right now. Share your story in the comments below, because silence only protects the abusers. The long drive home was swallowed by a silence so thick and suffocating, it pressed against the tinted windows of the SUV like deep-sea water pressure, making the vehicle feel like a sealed capsule sinking slowly into the dark. In the rearview mirror, my girls huddled together in the back seat, Zara's thin arm locked protectively around Chloe's trembling shoulders, both of their faces hollow and shell-shocked from the violent explosion they had just witnessed people, who were supposed to be their family, carry out in broad daylight. David gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles glowed bone-white under the harsh blue glow of the dashboard instruments. A muscle in his jaw twitched rhythmically, the tendons in his neck pulled taut as bridge cables. We stopped at a red light on an empty suburban road. The neon glow bled crimson across the rain-spattered windshield. He did not move. He did not look at me. When his voice finally broke the unbearable silence, it came out thick, hoarse, and loaded with an agonizing guilt that I could feel pressing against me from the driver's seat like physical weight. I'm sorry, Amber. I should have thrown her out of there. I shouldn't have let you stop me. I reached firmly across the center console, my hand clamping down hard on his tense, rigid shoulder. I squeezed once, deeply, transmitting absolute, unshakable resolve through the pressure of my grip, making certain he understood that I was not a victim in need of rescue. I was a commanding officer who had just identified a hostile threat and was now preparing to eliminate it on her own terms, on her own timeline. It's not your fault, David. This is my war against my own rotten family, and it's time for it to end. Completely end. We pulled into the driveway. I moved through the house, executing a methodical shutdown sequence with mechanical precision. Front door locked and deadbolted. Back patio slider secured. Alarm system armed. I walked the girls upstairs in silence. Zara went to her room without a word, her jaw set tight, a dangerous, quiet fury simmering behind her dark eyes that reminded me of my own reflection at 13. I knelt beside Chloe's bed, pulled the soft lavender blanket up to her chin, and pressed a long kiss to her forehead. I held her small hand until her breathing slowed into the deep, even rhythm of exhausted sleep, watching her eyelids flutter, memorizing the tiny weight of her fingers curled around mine. I stayed there for a full, silent minute. Then I rose, walked down the carpeted hallway, and left the role of mother hanging on the doorknob behind me. The home office waited at the end of the hall. I stepped inside and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. The loud, satisfying click of the lock sealed me in. I powered up the encrypted military-grade terminal on my desk. The cold, piercing blue light of the dual monitors cut across my face in the pitch-black room, carving sharp, angular shadows against the walls and the ceiling. My fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard without hesitation, bypassing biometric security layers with practiced automatic efficiency, diving directly into the core banking portals that controlled my extensive investment accounts and the intricate web of automated monthly transfers I had constructed 3 years ago to keep my brother's life from imploding. I pulled up the financial architecture on the left monitor. The numbers glowed green against the black background. Every line item cataloged and precise. $6,500 automatically routed on the first of every month to cover the mortgage on his sprawling, fraudulently obtained mansion. $3,000 scheduled for his eldest son's tuition at an elite private prep school, where the annual fees exceeded the median household income of an American family. $2,000 deposited into a recurring luxury account that funded Patricia's weekly spa appointments, her monthly hair treatments, her quarterly wardrobe refreshes, and the designer handbags she swung around at charity galas like trophies she had earned. I stared at the numbers. I felt my jaw clench hard enough to creak. Every single dollar on that screen had been bled from my body through grueling military deployments, 16-hour shifts in the command center, and calculated market risks that kept me awake staring at stock tickers at 3 a.m. All of it siphoned away by ungrateful parasites who had repaid my sacrifice by physically assaulting me in public and teaching their children to call my daughters worthless throwaways. As a senior commanding officer in cyber warfare, I was rigorously trained to identify hostile threats, neutralize them with extreme prejudice, and dismantle their operational capabilities without hesitation or sentiment. Tonight, the most dangerous threat to my family's safety and well-being was my own bloodline. The time for silent tolerance had officially, permanently, irrevocably expired. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. There was no lingering loyalty, no last-minute pang of sibling affection, no ghost of a shared childhood reaching out to grab my hand. My finger hovered steadily over the mouse, as calm and precise as a trigger finger resting on a high-value confirmed hostile target. Click. The $6,500 monthly mortgage transfer permanently deleted from the banking registry. Click. The elite private school tuition mandate wiped entirely from the server without leaving a trace. Click. The luxury stipend terminated. Every secondary credit line systematically frozen. Every future outbound routing number connected to my brother's name hard blocked with a finality that could not be reversed by anyone but me. I snapped the heavy laptop shut. The sudden total darkness of the room enveloped me like a wave of pure, clean, absolute silence. The financial execution was complete. The life support had been unplugged with surgical precision. I sat motionless in the dark, hands flat on the desk, breathing evenly, my heart rate settling back into the low, controlled rhythm of a soldier who has completed her mission objective. Now I just sat in the stillness, waiting for the parasites to bleed out. Weeks passed in blissful, uninterrupted silence for our household. The girls healed slowly but visibly. Zara filled an entire sketchbook with charcoal drawings of fortified castles and armored women on horseback, pressing the pencils so hard into the paper that the lines left grooves on the kitchen table beneath. Chloe laughed at breakfast for the first time since the barbecue, accidentally knocking over her cereal bowl and sending a wave of milk cascading down the front of her pajama shirt. She covered her mouth and giggled, and the sound of it hit me somewhere deep behind my ribs in a place I had forgotten existed. David buried himself in his architectural work, spreading massive blueprints across the dining room table every evening, his hands steady, his pencil strokes precise, the quiet rhythm of his creativity anchoring our home in a stability that felt earned, not inherited. I drove to the base every morning with a clarity I had not experienced in years, commanding my cyber unit with the focused, unburdened intensity of an officer who had finally eliminated the most dangerous mole in her own operation. Across town, operating on a timer they did not even know was ticking, the silent, invisible bombs I had planted deep inside their financial infrastructure began to detonate on schedule. The bank's automated systems triggered first. Aggressive, formally worded foreclosure notices arrived via certified mail at the mansion's front door, stamped with red ink, stripping away every grace period and deferment option Ethan had ever received. The elite private school administration followed within days, dispatching urgent phone calls and threatening emails to Patricia's personal inbox, promising immediate, non-negotiable expulsion of their sons if the outstanding tuition balance was not settled in full by close of business Friday. The final humiliation landed where it hurt her most in public. Patricia was standing at the polished, marble-topped reception counter of the exclusive day spa she had been visiting every Thursday for 3 years, casually sliding her platinum credit card across the surface with the practiced, bored confidence of a woman who had never been denied anything in her life. The terminal beeped harshly. Declined. Her perfectly manicured hand froze for a fraction of a second before she recovered, produced a second card from her designer wallet, and slid it across with a tight-lipped smile. Declined. A third card. Declined. The receptionist, trained in the specific art of handling exactly this species of humiliation, looked at her with a polished, sympathetic expression that said everything 1,000 words could not. Patricia snatched her cards off the counter, stuffed them into her purse, and walked out the frosted glass doors without a word, her heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor. The heavily mortgaged walls of their fabricated mansion were rapidly closing in, and the crushing pressure was just beginning. Despite the escalating, catastrophic financial collapse consuming every corner of their lives, Patricia was still far too arrogant, far too deeply entrenched in her own delusional mythology of how power worked to call me directly. In her manufactured reality, I was still the poor, dry, barren government grunt who married a successful architect. The real provider. The real decision-maker. David. She aimed her entire arsenal of panic, desperation, and manipulative fury directly at my husband, fundamentally, fatally misunderstanding where the true power in our marriage had always resided. David's phone buzzed and vibrated relentlessly on his glass drafting table day and night, trembling against the surface like a trapped insect. The voicemails accumulated in a growing tower of frantic, hysterical sobbing. The text messages arrived in chaotic, rapid-fire salvos that oscillated wildly between calculated emotional manipulation and raw, unhinged, screaming rage. David, why did you cut the money? The bank is foreclosing on the house. You can't be this cruel. David, please don't listen to your crazy wife. You can't abandon Ethan's family like this. Blood is thicker than water. David, pick up the phone. We need you. You're the only reasonable man here. David held up the glowing screen for me to read every single night over dinner, shaking his head slowly with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust at the sheer, breathtaking audacity of a woman who had physically struck his wife and called his children bastards, now begging him for money. I did not even blink. I told him to keep ignoring her. Let the silence eat her alive. Sheer suffocating desperation finally forced Patricia's hand on a gloomy, rain-slicked Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks later. She actively ambushed my husband at the quiet, upscale cafe located 1 block east of his architecture firm, a place he visited every afternoon for a single espresso and 30 minutes of silent reading. She slumped into the chair directly across from him without a greeting, without a hello, without any trace whatsoever of the polished, glamorous, champagne-clinking socialite facade she had worn like a second skin for a decade. She looked shockingly haggard. Her expensive designer makeup was badly smeared from crying, the mascara creating dark, wet tracks down both cheeks, like cracks spreading through porcelain. Her highlighted hair hung in unwashed, tangled clumps. She carried the frantic, darting, cornered animal look of a creature that had suddenly discovered the steel jaws of a trap had already closed around both of its legs. She did not bother with pleasantries. She launched directly into a weeping, loud, aggressively victimized monologue, her voice pitched high enough and broken enough to draw the horrified, uncomfortable stares of every patron in the cafe. David, you're too cruel. How can you push your brother's family out into the street? Just because of a petty squabble between women, just because of a moment of anger, you listen to that crazy wife of yours and cut everything off. You are the provider. You are the reasonable one. Why are you letting Amber manipulate you like this? This family needs you. David sat perfectly still through the entire performance. He did not interrupt. He did not shift in his seat. He let her run until the words dried up, and she was left sitting there, chest-heaving, mascara dripping onto the white tablecloth, waiting for the provider, the reasonable man, to open his wallet and make the nightmare go away. He reached forward with one hand and carefully, deliberately set his small espresso cup down on the porcelain saucer. The ceramic clinked softly against the tense silence of the room. He leaned his broad shoulders across the narrow table, and his dark, steady eyes locked onto hers with a contempt so cold, so controlled, so devastatingly precise, that it stopped her sobbing mid-breath, as if someone had reached into her chest and physically squeezed her lungs shut. Patricia, shut your mouth and listen carefully. First, you need to know the truth about that money, the money that kept you acting so superior all these years. Every single cent that saved your family, that kept your garbage high society facade from crumbling for 3 years, is not my money. It is Amber's salary. Money from her military career, from her blood, sweat, and smart investments. The very woman you always belittled as poor, dry, and a failure, single-handedly paid the mortgage for the house you live in, paid for the clothes on your back. Patricia's face went completely slack. Her jaw dropped open. Her fingers released the crumpled napkin she had been strangling, and it fell softly into her lap. Her painted lips moved soundlessly for several seconds, her brain visibly short-circuiting her entire constructed worldview, cracking down the center like a windshield struck by a boulder at highway speed. No, that's impossible. She's just a lowly grunt. David did not blink. He did not soften. He leaned another inch closer and twisted the blade deeper. Second, you constantly degraded Amber as a useless, barren woman. The truth is, the one diagnosed with male infertility, the reason we couldn't have biological children, is me. Amber is perfectly healthy, but she chose to take that stigma upon herself, absorbing all the scornful looks, accepting your family's humiliation, just to protect my honor and dignity from conservative, cruel, uneducated people like you. She endured it for 17 years because she truly loves me. And you only love your empty, hollow status. He straightened up, reached into the breast pocket of his jacket, produced a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it flat onto the pristine white tablecloth beside his untouched espresso. He stood. He buttoned a single button on his suit jacket with calm, measured precision. Then he turned and walked out of the cafe without looking back, leaving Patricia sitting alone in her chair, mouth still hanging open, mascara-striped cheeks glistening under the pendant lights, a woman watching every single pillar of her constructed reality collapse into smoking rubble around her, while a cafe full of strangers stared and said nothing. Operating from the absolute security of my command base, I mobilized Jessica Sterling, my attorney. She was a former JAG officer with the professional warmth of a scalpel and the negotiation style of a guided missile. We coordinated a two-pronged attack with the synchronized precision of a military operation. First, Jessica secured ironclad sworn affidavits from my high-ranking Navy colleagues who had witnessed every second of the BBQ assault. Armed with undeniable testimony from decorated federal officers, she filed immediate severe criminal charges against Patricia for assaulting an active duty service member. An emergency restraining order was issued within 48 hours, non-negotiable and legally binding, creating an invisible wall of federal protection around my family that Patricia could not breach without facing immediate arrest. Second, I personally delivered the meticulously compiled dossier of Ethan's falsified income statements, the exact fraudulent documents he used to secure that massive mortgage, directly into the hands of the bank's Internal Risk Management and Compliance Division. The corporate response was swift and entirely without mercy. When presented with documented evidence of large-scale financial fraud orchestrated by a broker who had already been blacklisted for insider trading, the bank moved with a speed that surprised even Jessica. They froze every single one of my brother's remaining personal and joint accounts within 72 hours. The foreclosure process was accelerated, aggressively bypassing all standard warnings and grace periods. Field agents arrived at the property to formally seal it. The mansion, the gleaming facade, the manicured lawns, the three-car garage filled with leased luxury vehicles, all of it was wrapped in yellow tape and legal notices like a crime scene. Ethan was drowning in a flood of legal summons, criminal court dates, and brutal eviction notices, each one arriving by certified mail with the mechanical regularity of a metronome, counting down the remaining seconds of a life built entirely on borrowed time and stolen credit. Completely broken, bankrupt, and drowning in legal jeopardy, my brother made one final desperate play. He called me directly for the first time in months, his voice cracked and unrecognizable, and begged for a dinner, a sit-down, a chance to apologize in person and negotiate a truce. He promised tearful remorse. He promised Patricia would kneel before my daughters and beg their forgiveness. He invoked our mother's name 3 times in 90 seconds, wielding it like a shield made of tissue paper. I accepted the invitation, not to reconcile, to witness the end. The restaurant was dimly lit upscale, tucked into a quiet corner of the financial district. Private dining room in the back. Dark wood paneling. A single overhead lamp casting a cone of amber light over the glass table. David and I arrived together side by side and took our seats across from the smoldering wreckage of my family. Patricia sat hunched beside Ethan, utterly unrecognizable from the champagne-swirling socialite who had slapped me across the face 8 weeks prior. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, no designer clothing. Her face was hollowed out, her eyes puffy and rimmed with dark circles, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if she were physically trying to hold herself together. Every ounce of arrogant venom had been drained from her body, leaving behind a brittle, ghostly shell that flinched when the waiter set down a glass of water. Ethan started weeping before the appetizers arrived. He pressed a cloth napkin to his face, his voice cracking as he reached across the glass table. "Amber, please. We are family. Blood is the strongest bond in the world." He sobbed, tears spilling into his collar. "You have to give us a second chance. I will make Patricia kneel on this floor right now in front of your daughters and beg for their forgiveness personally. Think of Mom, Amber. This will break her heart. It will kill her to see our family torn apart like this. Just please, call off the lawyers." I sat across from him with my back pressed firmly against the leather booth, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching his mouth move and hearing the words spill out and land on the glass table between us like dead leaves. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not grief, not love. Clinical, total, absolute detachment. The kind of detachment a surgeon feels when looking at an X-ray of a bone they have already decided to cut. I let him finish. I let the exhausted, suffocating silence stretch across the table until it became physically uncomfortable, until Patricia shifted in her seat and Ethan's wet, desperate eyes darted between my face and David's, searching frantically for any crack in our expressions that he could exploit. Then I moved. Slowly, methodically, with the deliberate precision of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. I reached down beside my chair, unbuckled the heavy brass clasp of my leather briefcase, and withdrew 2 thick, bound stacks of legal documents. I raised them to the height of the table, held them there for 1 suspended second, and then slammed them down onto the pristine glass surface. The heavy, resonant thud echoed through the private dining room like a gavel striking its block. "There is no reconciliation here. You chose this outcome the day Patricia raised her hand to slap me and called my kids throwaways. I spent 17 years of my youth and money tolerating tumors disguised as relatives, trying to protect this rotten fake family. But my limit is reached. My patience is gone. This dinner is not a negotiation table. It's for me to see with my own eyes that you receive your proper sentence. From this second on, walking out that door, there is no bloodline, no family between us. You will pay dearly for every lying penny, every cruel word. Good luck in court, you're going to need it." David and I stood up in perfect unison. He placed his hand on the small of my back. I did not look down at my brother's collapsing face. I did not look at Patricia's trembling hollow shell. I picked up my briefcase, squared my shoulders, and walked through the heavy wooden door of the private dining room, through the restaurant, and out into the cool night air. I took 1 deep, full breath. The air tasted clean. The sky was clear. I did not look back. Not once. Several months passed. The peaceful, unshakable new order I had built for my household cemented itself into place, with the quiet permanence of concrete setting around rebar. The corporate bank formally evicted my brother and his wife from the mansion, seizing every remaining asset tied to his name. They relocated to a cramped, poorly lit apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the hallway lights flicker and the walls are thin enough to hear every argument from 3 doors down. The ironclad restraining order held firm and unchallenged. They existed now only as distant ghosts on the far side of a legal wall I had built with my own hands and my own money. Diego and Mateo, the older nephews who had grown up riding in the back seats of leased luxury sedans and attending classes at an institution with Latin on the crest, dropped out of their universities within weeks of each other. They spent their nights washing dishes and bussing sticky tables at roadside diners just to cover rent. The glittering fake empire of the Ortiz family was nothing but dust scattered in the wind, carried away by the same currents that had once inflated it. In the middle of the wreckage, a single unexpected piece of mail arrived at our front gate. I noticed it in the stack of bills and junk flyers, a plain white envelope with no return address, my name written on the front, in careful, slightly uneven handwriting. I opened it, standing in the hallway leaning against the wall. Inside were 2 pages of notebook paper covered in the careful, deliberate script of a 14-year-old boy. Lucas. He wrote to Zara and Chloe, not to me. He apologized with a rawness, a broken confessional honesty that I genuinely had not believed he was capable of producing. He admitted word by aching word that he had been poisoned by his parents' toxic hatred, that he had repeated their words without understanding what they meant or what damage they could cause, that he had heard his mother say those exact phrases about my daughters at the dinner table dozens of times, and he had absorbed them like a sponge absorbs dirty water, not knowing any better. He wrote that he was ashamed, that he wanted to be different, that he was going to forge his own path forward as far away from their delusions as his legs could carry him. I read the letter standing perfectly still in the hallway. When I finished the second page, I slid the paper gently back into the envelope and felt a genuine, unguarded smile pull at the corners of my mouth for the first time in months. The vicious generational cycle of toxicity had been broken in at least one of them. One was enough. A quiet evening in deep winter settled softly over our house, the kind of stillness that only comes when a heavy blanket of snow insulates every surface, every rooftop, every bare tree branch, dampening the world into a profound, cottony silence. The stone fireplace crackled steadily in the living room, casting a warm, flickering golden glow across the oak floors, and the thick, patterned rug where Zara lay stretched out on her stomach, completely absorbed in a detailed charcoal sketch of a medieval knight. David sat in his leather armchair near the window, reading a thick hardcover book on structural engineering, occasionally looking up from the pages and meeting my eyes with a dark, steady gaze, full of deep, quiet, enduring gratitude that said more than any sentence he had ever constructed. Chloe climbed clumsily onto the sofa beside me, clutching a soft velvet throw pillow to her chest. She tucked her small, warm head securely under my chin, her fine hair smelling of sweet strawberry shampoo. She settled against my body with the total, absolute trust of a child who has never had a reason to question whether the arms holding her will let go. She was quiet for a long time, watching the fire dance behind the glass screen. Then she looked up at me with wide, impossibly innocent eyes, her voice soft and genuinely curious. "Mommy, what does family really mean? Is it only the people who gave birth to you who share your blood that make a family?" I wrapped both of my arms securely around her small frame. I pressed a long, slow, tender kiss to her warm forehead. I looked across the room at David, whose book had lowered into his lap, whose eyes glistened in the firelight. I looked down at Zara, who had stopped sketching and was watching me from the rug with her chin resting on her folded arms, waiting. I drew a breath that filled my lungs completely for what felt like the first time in 27 years. Real family isn't about blood or DNA, Chloe. Real family are the people willing to stand up to fight at all costs, to protect each other, to love unconditionally, and to never let anyone trample on each other's dignity. And I will always be here, the strongest warrior protecting our family from every storm. Chloe smiled, a brilliant, glowing smile that lit up her entire face. She closed her eyes, slowly nestled deeper into my arms, and drifted off to sleep, infinitely safe in the embrace of a commander who had finally won her greatest, most important war. Real family is built on fierce loyalty and respect, not just a shared last name or toxic genetics. If my journey to protect my true family resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share how you built your own chosen family in the comments below.